Awesome. We are live. Welcome, everyone. We're here with Elizabeth from the Art of Typography. Definitely check that out. We'll wait a couple of minutes for everyone to tune in. There is like a 10-second delay between LinkedIn and YouTube Live and our StreamYard. But for those who are just tuning in, let us know in the chat where y'all are tuning in from. And what is everyone looking forward to these days? Let me refresh the LinkedIn so I can see. Where are you tuning in from, Elizabeth?
I'm tuning in from New York City.
Nice. I'm tuning in from the SF Bay area. Cool. We have 20, 30, 35. There are a lot of people joining on LinkedIn right now. Toronto, nice. Hi, everyone. For those who just joining in, I see almost 100 of y'all on LinkedIn already. Let us know in the chat where y'all are tuning in from and what are you looking forward to these days. We'll get started in about 2 minutes or so. There is a 10-second delay between what you see on StreamYard and LinkedIn, but we'll have many links for you to share. Los Angeles, nice. Tune in from New York, Long Island, Toronto, Los Angeles, Seattle, Texas, howdy. Costa Rica, oh nice. I'm going there like in February. Tuning from the SFA area, nice, bright and early. Argentina, Poland, Ohio, Montreal, Germany. I need Nigeria, San Jose. Wow. Like all over the world, like London, India, Kansas City, San Diego, Montreal, Texas, Toronto. Nice. Hello from Toronto. Hello. India. Awesome. So we have like 123 people live on LinkedIn. We'll get started in about a minute. For those of you just tuning in, let us know where y'all are. Where are you in the world? And what are you looking forward to these days, if you wish? India, California, Connecticut. Awesome. Pakistan. Wow, we have like almost all the continents covered, which is pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, yeah. I just love watching like the chat come in.
Yeah, amazing. Awesome. So looks like we have like 150 people live on LinkedIn right now. So thank you all so much for coming. We're so excited to have Elizabeth here from the Art of Visual Design. Definitely check it out. Amazing visual designs. And I'm Grace. I am the founder of Design Buddies. If y'all are new to Design Buddies, just clicked on this on LinkedIn. Design Buddies is a community to help you level up your design career. So we have 62,000 members on Discord, and our goal is to help you level up in the sense of providing educational resources, workshops, events, both in person and online, design challenges, content, and more. And I founded Design Buddies about 3 years ago when I was a student transitioning over to design. And I'm also a content creator, and my day job, I'm also a UX designer at a large tech company. So I'm really excited to be here today. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Elizabeth.
Hey everyone, my name is Elizabeth. I have been a product designer and educator for about 10 years now. Earlier this year, I quit my job to start teaching design full-time. And so today I kind of wanted to share a little bit about what it's been like to teach design and focus specifically on the topic of typography, which is one of my favorite design things to talk about. So to get started, we are all going to pop into this Figma link. I am sharing it in the chat, and Grace also shared it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start presenting my screen. Cool. Looks like you all can see it. So typically when I start these events, I like to start with a little like introduction question to kind of get you all thinking about the topic. So the question we're thinking about today is we're focused on a font scavenger hunt, where the idea is that you bring in, I realize you do have edit access. Okay, so you basically copy one of these cards here into one of these sections on the right here. And the idea is that we're looking for 4 different fonts. We're looking for a font that makes you cringe, a font that you love, a font that feels dated, and a font that feels trendy. You can pick any of these categories. You can do all of them. You can do one of them, whatever you want. But go ahead and copy one of these cards over here to the right and try to find a font that fits one of these categories. If you are newer to Figma, I'll show you how you can change the font. So basically, you can first drag this card over to the right. The fastest way to copy it is to select the card and then hold down Option while dragging it over like this. And then if you command click the text, command clicking in Figma will target a specific item within the group. You can change the font by clicking on the font name right here. By default right now, it's IBM Plex Sans, but you can change it to any font that you want. Figma this year released this really fancy font picker, which is really awesome because it allows you to actually preview the fonts. So go ahead and look for a font that fits each of the categories. And when you're done, go ahead and write a little description about why you made the choice. And it's okay if we lose all these cards on the left side. I have a backup, so if you drag it over, that's totally fine as well. Let's go ahead and spend a few minutes doing that. And I'll go ahead and also call out some of the ones that I think are pretty unique. I'm also going to do the exercise as well. Okay, a font that makes me cringe. I think when I think of a font that makes me cringe, I think of like ones that are very like cursive-y slightly. I don't know why, but this one like kind of reminds me a bit of like a wedding invitation a little bit. So that's like one that kind of makes me cringe. Another one that makes me cringe is personally, so this is my personal preference, is the font Railway, because for me, I don't know what it is about the W, but that kind of like makes me a little, I feel like the W always has a little bit of like the two crosses in the center kind of make me cringe a little bit. So that's probably what my nomination would be for now. Okay. Go ahead and keep adding your fonts. This is so cool. I am zooming out right now, and I think this might be the most number of people I've ever seen in a Figma file before, which is pretty awesome. My goal has always been to break Figma with one of these events. And so we might be breaking a little bit today because I feel like it's taking a minute to save on my computer, which is super cool. Okay, go ahead and keep finding different fonts that fit these categories. You can also start down here. It's a little less crowded. You can start with a font that feels trendy. And don't forget to write a little explanation. I'm going to go ahead and call out a few of these. Here's a papyrus. I like how the description says outdated. There's a lot of like cursive-y ones. More cursive-y ones. Ooh, this one is like a kind of like a script calligraphic font choice. Another cursive-y one. There's also a bunch of space on the right side, so if you're feeling a little cramped on the left side where the party is at, you can also move to the right side as well. Okay, let's see. A font that you love. Oh my God, I love this one. This one is so cute. It has like, oh, it's actually showing up very differently, which is extremely chaotic, but this one has hearts and Gotham is very different. And so Gotham is actually the font that the Obama campaign uses or used in the past. That's one of its most famous use cases. The GQ logo is also Gotham. So this is not the right one, but you can use your imagination. Imagine that. There are a lot of sans serifs happening here. Some fun explorations on this side as well. I'm not 100% sure how quickly Figma is updating right now, so hopefully people's fonts will show up soon. A font that feels dated. This one is interesting. It's like it was the sketchbook one earlier. Another example of papyrus here. I'm gonna go ahead and try to find a font that I personally think feels trendy as well. Let's see. Usually I try to stick to Google Fonts for these because then if you're interested in using the font after, you can. Ooh, this one is really fun. I don't know if it feels trendy, but this one is really fun. Let's see. This one is also like very bubbly. I kind of like this one. I feel like I could see it used in kind of like a beauty product or something because of these like ball terminals here. Okay, let's spend a couple more minutes on this. And as you're exploring, if you notice any themes in each of these sections, feel free to share those themes that you notice within the chat. So for example, a theme that I notice in the fonts that make me cringe section are the fact that there are a lot of very script cursive-y oriented fonts in this section here. There's also a lot of fonts that feel really illegible as well. I'm going to try to organize this a little bit so that you can see all the different options. In this one here, a font that you love, seems like people played it pretty safe actually, which is kind of surprising. So there are a lot of simple sans serifs here. This one is really interesting. I've never seen this before. It's super unique. The combination of Gothic and pixel art, super cool. This one I think is Sin, which is a pretty trendy font right now because it's a little wider. And then this one is also pretty fun. It kind of has like a very short X height with a tall capital letter. Cool. So we'll spend a few more minutes here. It looks like there's about 60 of us in the Figma file. Again, feel free to share any reflections that you might have in the chat.
For those of y'all who can't find the link, it's on the screen, tinyurl.com/typographyfigma. Trying to reply to all your comments on LinkedIn too.
Thank you, Grace. And if your Figma is running extremely slowly, like mine is lagging a little bit, you can try turning off the multiplayer cursors, which makes it a little less fun. But if you do Command/ or Control/ if you're on a PC, you can search for multiplayer cursors and turn them off. And it should make it slightly faster for you. I'm going to try to keep them on so that we can see where people are, but definitely try turning it off. Another thing is if it's running slowly for you, what I recommend doing is you can copy specific sections within the file to a different file that's your own private area, and you can still complete the exercise there as well. Okay, cool. So we are going to go ahead and move on, but thank you so much for participating in this exercise. I'm definitely going to take a look at these in detail later, but there are so many different fonts here that I've never seen before, super creative ones like this one, and hopefully you all found something fun while you were doing this exercise. I'm going to ask everyone to stop their cursor for a second, and we are going to move over to the second page on the left side here in Figma where it says Type Hierarchy, the rules. So go ahead and find me in this page here. Cool. Let's see how many people are on this page. I don't see anyone here yet, so not sure if people have appeared on this page yet. So go ahead and pop over to page 2 in Figma. Okay, I see a few faces here. Not sure if we've actually crushed it. Okay, cool. Slowly people are coming over. Great.
Yeah, there's a delay. So
Oh, right. I forgot.
yeah,
Even
it's
as I'm
okay.
saying that, I was like, where is everyone? Okay, not
Yeah,
everyone
no, it's
is here
okay.
at once. Okay,
There we
so
go.
welcome. Don't touch anything. Yeah, I'm going to explain what's going on first because it will be peak chaos in a few seconds. So do not touch anything in this first row. This first row is labeled Elizabeth, so this is like my section. But the idea is that you're all going to pick a number between 1 to 100, and it might feel a little chaotic, but I promise you'll only be chaotic for a little bit. So pick any number, and that will be your row. As long as someone else hasn't claimed it yet, you can claim it. And in order to claim the row, what you're going to do is you're going to command click your name, which is next to the number, click enter and type your name inside. You can also type an anonymous handle or something, whatever you want, but go ahead and find an empty row and claim the row. If you zoom out, you'll notice there are 100, and every time I do this, people either gravitate toward the front area or the back area, and so let's see how quickly we can fill up each of these sections here. And if your computer is lagging, highly recommend you can copy the starting template and do the exercise in a separate Figma file as well. So go ahead and claim a section. Any section but the first section. So I'm going to draw a star here. This is my section. So I'm number 1, and you can pick any number that's not taken between 1 to 100. So once everyone has a section, what we're going to do is we're going to practice making a type hierarchy on this body of text through a series of steps where we change one visual axis at a time. And so the goal of creating a type hierarchy is to make it easier to process a bunch of content that otherwise kind of blends together. So today we're looking at an excerpt from the book Invisible Cities, and I really love using books as an example of practicing type hierarchy because you can experiment with lots of different levels of hierarchy, from like chapter titles, the title of the book, to like the author name and stuff like that. And so it's pretty good practice. If you like this exercise, you can grab any book that you like and try it on an excerpt as well. If you can't edit the file, I highly recommend copying this template over to a different page so that you can edit it. The other note is that sometimes in order to edit a Figma file, you have to be logged in, and so you might have to log in as well. Okay, so let's see. It looks like most people have found a home. If your cursor is overlapping with someone else's, it could mean that you are both trying to use the same section, and so maybe try finding a different section. Okay. Cool. Again, in order to claim a section, please change the name that is next to the number. There are some availabilities in column with 41 to 50. There's a bunch up here, and there's some up here as well, 51 to 60. You can also put a star next to your name so that people know that it's taken. That is also something you can do as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If you are more comfortable with Figma and design in general, feel free to move ahead and experiment a little further. If you want to follow along, you can follow me as I go through this process. Okay, so step 1, we are going to change the most important axis of visual hierarchy, which is changing the size. A lot of times when you're creating hierarchy, changing the size will give you enough contrast between layers of type hierarchy. And so I always like to start with size first, because oftentimes I notice that people change too many layers at once. So to change the font size, you're going to go ahead and command click a layer. One note is that I do have auto layout applied to this group of text. So if you're not comfortable with auto layout, things might start shifting in ways you unexpect, but it should be okay. So go ahead and command click the title Invisible Cities. I'm going to be working with the default font here, Enter, but you are free to work with any font choice that you want. I'm going to go ahead and change the font size to be larger for the title, and I'm going to change the font size for the chapter headings, again by doing command click while holding on shift to select multiple layers. I'm going to change the chapter headings to be slightly larger to 24. There's not necessarily a specific number that you need to change these sizes to. It's really up to your personal preference, and your preference here will kind of determine your individual design style. My design style tends to be a little bit more dramatic, and I really love high contrast, and so that's why I went for very large text. But you can get away with changing the text more minimally if that's your personal style as well. And so I highly recommend changing the text size to whatever you feel like is best here. And make sure to make the changes in your own section in Figma. Okay, I'm going to zoom out and see how people are doing here. Do not change any other axis yet. So again, we're focusing on experimenting first with size only and no font weight. So no bolding yet. Cool. And if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. And if you have a specific question about something that's broken in your specific area, put your number in the chat and I will try to get to it if I have time. Okay, so once you have changed the font size, what we're going to do next is we're going to make a copy of this original frame here to the right. And the fastest way to make a copy of this is to do Command D after you select the frame. So click on the title of the frame and do Command D. This will duplicate the frame to the right by 40 pixels. Again, in order to duplicate the frame, go ahead and click on the frame name. Most of yours should be called template, and then click Command D to duplicate it to the right. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust spacing. So there are a few different elements of spacing. There's spacing between the items, so spacing between the author name and the title name, and spacing between the chapter and the body text. And so we're going to adjust the spacing so that groups of content that are related are closer together. So the first one I'd probably do is I would probably change the chapter and the body text so that they're closer together. So I'm making that a little tighter. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the author name and the title of the book so that's a little tighter as well. Something I am going to do that I feel like doing that is a little bit unspacing related is I'm going to move the author name to the top because I feel like after I changed the Invisible Cities text to be larger, the title felt like it was getting buried by the text on top. And so now when I change the order, it looks like the author name is sitting on top of the title instead. The other thing that you can change with spacing is you can change the line height. Line height is the spacing between lines of text within a paragraph. In Figma, you can change it in the text panel on the right. It's right under the font weight. By default, it should be something that says auto, and you can increase the line height to whatever you want. Typically for paragraph text, you want the line height to be a little taller. I am not using any commands for changing the spacing. I am changing the spacing in the auto layout group on the right. I do not, I'm not gonna talk about auto layout today, but if you're interested, I do have a free auto layout tutorial on YouTube if you want to kind of dive into that more later. But you can change the spacing between items within an auto layout group by changing the setting here that says vertical gap between items. And if you want to change the spacing within the paragraph, you change the line height, which is under the font weight option. By default, it says auto. To change the spacing between items, in this universe, in this file, you change the spacing by adjusting the auto layout gap. So it says vertical gap between items. And when you hover over this option on the right, it'll show you where the gap will change. Okay, we're going to move on. I think I might try using a slightly smaller paragraph text, but maybe not, we'll see. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is we are going to change the font weight. So we're going to do the same thing that we did earlier, where we copied the starting frame over by doing Command D. And now what you can do is you can adjust the font weight to create more contrast. So you can try using a weight like black. You can try using a weight like semi-bold. Again, depending on how high contrast you go, it kind of determines your unique visual style. Many designers I know will use something lighter like semi-bold. Other designers I know who like a bolder treatment will go with extra bold or black. A lot of times when you're starting out with typography, I highly recommend sticking with one font family first with a variety of weights. I noticed earlier there was a question about combining multiple typefaces together, and I don't recommend doing that until you're more comfortable with using one, because if you can use one really, really well, then that is oftentimes enough for creating a really solid type hierarchy. So I'm gonna make mine a little bit bolder because I feel like making it a little bit dramatic. So I bolded the chapter text and I made the title of the book the black weight. Trying to get a high level view of how everyone is doing. It's kind of cool because I don't actually have to zoom in that much, because I can tell if you bolded it in the third column. So you can kind of see the progression even from this like zoomed out universe. Pretty cool. Okay. Then the next step will be to change the font color. So there are stars next to steps 4 and 5 because steps 4 and 5, I feel like, are almost always optional. And so this is purely for the sake of the exercise. These are kind of like additional layers of contrast you can add on top of the existing layers of contrast. So when I say changing the font color, I don't necessarily mean like changing the text to be a different hue like this. That is one example, but it is a very loud example. Instead, a lot of times people might change the shade of gray that's being used. So they might make something like this slightly light gray so that it recedes more into the background. Oftentimes when you're using font color, the purpose is to highlight something that's in a sentence. So if you're working on like a website, you might highlight the link in the middle of a sentence a color so that it pops. Again, this step is often optional, but for the sake of this exercise, you can experiment with color as well. Using gray is also really common in like card design. So if you have a design, like you're designing a Twitter clone or something, and you have like last, or it's like sent 2 minutes ago, usually that is going to be in a light gray. Another thing people like to change is they sometimes will change the color of the body text so that it's a lighter gray as well. Really up to you there. Okay, we're almost done. We're going to copy the frame again by clicking on the frame name and pressing Command D. Now we are going to change the font style. The font style, I would say, is probably the least used of them all. But when I say font style, what I mean is changing something to be italicized or adding a strike through or adding an underline. In this case, I'm going to try italicizing the second word in the title. Actually, I'm going to try doing the first word. We'll see how that goes. Not sure. You can try both and see which one you like. You can also try changing like part of the title of the chapter as well. And once you finish doing that, the last step is to polish it. And polish really looks like deciding if you need all these different levels of changes. A lot of times when I'm in the polish phase, I will adjust the line height a little bit so that it's a little bit easier to read. I might go back and decide, oh, I actually really don't need this italic version. So maybe I'll go back and only use bold. You might go back and decide that you want to adjust the spacing a little bit. So this part is really about editing your work and deciding which elements of things before that you want to keep. And again, there's so many different ways to do this exercise. So while you all work, I'm going to take this and show how you can create like many different types of contrast. So for example, some people, if they want to have more minimal contrast, it's a little less dramatic, they might do something like this, where they have like these titles are semi-bold, this is also semi-bold and only a slightly larger. And I'm breezing through this on purpose to show an example, but these are both examples of type hierarchies that feel pretty different from each other. This one is a lot more minimal contrast, this one is higher contrast. You can even go higher contrast if you want to be even more dramatic. So you could make the font size even bigger for the title. You could make the font size even bigger for the chapter heading. You can make it even bolder. And notice how all three of these are examples of good type hierarchy, but they kind of have different flares because of how much contrast there is. So this one is super low contrast, and you could even go even lower contrast. Some people might only do size as the primary way of adding contrast, like this one here. And so it's really up to you which style you want to go for. I tend to go for stuff that's more on the left, and I've worked with planner designers who tend to go with styles that are more like the one on the right. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and kind of like browse around and see what everyone's been up to. Notice some people had fun changing the title font. We're gonna break some more rules in the next section. There are a lot of different, very interesting options here. This one is fun. It's using a serif. Some more experimentations here. Background color. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat as well. We're gonna move on to the next section in a little bit. some really cool ones here. Great. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we are going to take this to the next level and try experimenting with prompts that kind of encourage you to break out of the traditional ways of doing typography. So this specific method here, I think, is a very traditional formulaic way of approaching typography, where you change one thing at a time and try to create a minimal type hierarchy to communicate a message. There are also more fun examples of typography where you can be a little bit more experimental and try to break outside of the box. And so that's what we are going to do next. So we are going to move to page 3. It's called Type Hierarchy, What Rules? And you're going to pick the same number that you chose earlier. And while people are finding their section, I'm going to answer a couple of the questions that are in the chat. Someone asked, any examples on a dashboard page? Today we will not be covering typography on dashboards, but typography on a dashboard page works very similarly. Your goal is to find the minimum number of font styles needed to create the dashboard. So typically the biggest flaw I see is that people have like way too many font styles, when really on a dashboard you maybe need 3 to 5. So the idea is like finding the minimum number of font styles. A font style is the combination of size, weight, and style together. So finding the minimum number of those sets to create a type hierarchy on the page. And then how do you know if the fonts belong to the same family? There are many different ways to categorize fonts. And the main one to know that is the most important distinction is whether or not something is a serif or a sans serif. Serifs are the fonts with the little feet at the end. They tend to be used in like more traditional newspapers. A serif example would be something like source serif. This is a serif, and this one here is a sans serif. And so that's the most important distinction. The other one that is commonly chosen is the monospace option. So this is a monospace font. This one is interesting because all the characters are the same size, width-wise. But there are a lot of different subcategories of those, and you can read full books on font categorization. I highly recommend reading them because it's super fun. Okay, so again, go ahead and find your row. Try to stick with the same number as earlier. Stay organized. I like how people are claiming their thing with the star. I think that's actually very useful. I might add that in the future so that people don't go into your space. One fun thing you can do with the star tool in Figma, this is a little bit of a detour, you can increase the number of points on the star by holding down the circle that's at the tip of the point. And you can create more interesting stars that way by adjusting these little circle anchor points. So for this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to explore the prompts that are listed up here at the top. There are 4 different prompts. You can follow me and go in my order, or you can do whatever order you want and explore as your heart desires. The first one I would say is like pretty safe. So this one is the classic, use a serif and a sans serif of your choice to create a type hierarchy. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the headings. And for the headings, I am going to pick something. I don't know what yet. I'm going to try to pick a Google font so that you all can use it if you want. I think I'm going to try using the serif for the headings. So I'm going to try using this font called Xer. It's kind of goofy and like very rigid, which I kind of like. I specifically like how the eyes are kind of like these little diamond shapes. And then I'm gonna go ahead and decrease the line height a little bit. One thing you'll notice is like with Xer specifically, you'll notice that the line height is really tall. And so when the text wraps like this, it's really hard to read one, and the text feels like it's in two separate groups. And so you're going to want to make it a little bit tighter. I'm gonna make the chapter headings a little smaller so that the heading is the biggest item on the page. One way that I'm changing the font size really fast is I hold down shift when I'm in the box so that when I shift up versus shift down, I'm increasing and decreasing the size by 10-point increments so that the size adjustment is a little bit bigger. And then I start using 1 increment when I want to kind of refine the size a little more. So I think, yeah, I'll use Xer for my headings like this. And then for my sans serif, we're not going to dive a lot into how to pick a good pairing here. There are 2 ways that are good, I think, for people getting started. One way is to pick a serif and a sans serif that are, or pick a serif that is kind of more fun and has more personality, and then pick a sans serif that kind of recedes into the background so that it doesn't clash with the serif. That is one option. So for example, here, by default, all these are using Inter, which is kind of like a default font, honestly. And so these 2 fonts don't clash that much because the Inter font is kind of like a system font. It's kind of like water. It's not really in your face. So it is pretty safe to combine. The other option for people who are newer to combining, I'm going to do it over here, but you can find a font that it's part of a superfamily. So for example, this is IBM Plex Serif. So that's what I changed the headings to. But there's also IBM Plex Sans, which is kind of like a sister font. And you can adjust it so that the paragraphs are using the sans serif and then the headings are using the serif. And that's one way of starting to experiment with them, is by using 2 fonts that are part of the same superfamily. And superfamily fonts are great because they share the same structure, so they will always look good together. And the way you can tell that they share the same structure is if you overlap the characters together. So here is, so if you put the characters like next to each other, you'll notice that the size of each of the characters is pretty similar and the underlying skeleton. But that was a little detour. So those are kind of the 2 ways you can combine. I'm gonna go ahead and go back to this one. I think I'm gonna use PT Sans for the paragraph text and increase the line height a little bit. Then I'm gonna go through and adjust the spacing. I might adjust the color a little bit. So this is one option of using a serif and a sans serif to create a hierarchy. Xer also comes with a variety of weights. So again, like I mentioned earlier, if I end up bolding the heading, for example, you notice that the vibe completely changes because now I've introduced more contrast and it's a little bit more in my face. So you can kind of experiment with different weights. The second prompt is to use 4 different typefaces and at least 3 different hues. Hues are like different, like red, yellow, green. Those are all hues. And so try to use at least 3 different colors within your composition. This one is really focused on kind of breaking you outside of traditional boundaries of visual design. And the reason why I like to do exercises like this is because if you experiment like really chaotically, sometimes when you're experimenting really chaotically, you create something that is kind of interesting. And so you can take that grain of interesting and bring it into your work. So go ahead and start experimenting with that one. While you do that, I'm going to respond to this typography book question. I'm not in front of my bookshelf right now, otherwise I would grab them, but I think The classic one that people recommend for beginners is oh my god, Thinking with Type by Ellen Lupton. I actually love all of her books. Her books are all really good, and she's an educator herself, so she has a really approachable way of writing. Another one that I like is called Type Matters. That one is pretty practical. It comes in like kind of like a leather. It's a really pretty book. The cover is like leather, and the cover literally says Type Matters in white bold text. And the one that is always recommended that I think is like kind of overrated is Elements of Typographic Style. It's extremely technical, and I think there are elements that are practical, but I think it makes typography more of a science than an art, and I think it's more of an art. So those are a few. I'm probably forgetting a bunch of them, but those are like the main ones. Okay. So onto prompt 2, use 4 different typefaces and at least 3 different hues. Okay, let's see. I think I will start by changing everything. I'm gonna try experimenting with like a monospace and see what happens. Who knows? And again, this is really about kind of trying things and seeing what happens. And so I'm gonna pick things at random and then see if I can make something out of it. I'm gonna start by doing this. The books are Thinking with Type by Ellen Lupton, and Type Matters, I forget who the author is. Okay, oops, got distracted. I think I might try adding like a chaotic situation here. We'll see what happens. So there's like this trend right now to change the font inline, which kind of creates an interesting effect. And so that's what I'm experimenting with. But who knows? I kind of don't love the bold font I chose. So I might go back and change it, go find something else. One moment. Talking out loud while you're designing is really hard. If you're a designer who has been in an interview process recently, it kind of feels like talking out loud during like a design challenge where you're just like constantly explaining your reasoning. Okay, I kind of like that one that I saw earlier. Actually, I'm scrolling through these too fast. I found one earlier that I thought was kind of interesting. For these ones, it's the second exercise where you're looking for like you're kind of working with like maximalism. One thing I have realized with prompts like this is that it can be really helpful to go all out and try to be way more chaotic than you think you need to be, because a lot of times that will actually feel like you're doing it more on purpose than if you are trying to if you use fonts that are all too similar to each other. So I think I'm going to try changing the number to something different. Okay, we'll use this for now, for the sake of time. So now that I have all these different, so I think I have 4 different fonts families that I'm using. Maybe I'll try changing this to this, I'm not sure. It's like, okay, I'm gonna try changing the colors now. So usually I chaotically decide to change the background color first because I think it's the most fun. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start changing parts of the colors here. Half the time when I do this, I really regret my choices and what I make. So we'll see how it turns out today. I'm trying kind of like a clashy neon color situation. I'll change the text color all later. We probably won't have time to get to all the prompts because I want to save a little bit of time for questions. So if you have any questions that you want me to answer before the time is up, feel free to use the chat as I try to make this look less chaotic than it already is. I bet it's use like white text. This is so chaotic. One note I'm noticing right now is that I have too many, it's like slightly too neon, and so I'm going to try to pare it down so it's a little darker, so it's like a little less harsh. And another thing I'm noting is when I try to use like many different colors, it can be helpful to kind of like separate out the color usage a little bit so that it feels a little bit more intentional. So sometimes, for example, like here I'm using this blue randomly, but it's not anywhere else. And so I might try to bring it up somewhere else as well. But it's still really chaotic. I think this cursive up here is a little bit unnecessary. Letter spacing is actually a very controversial thing to adjust within typography. There is a book, another book that I haven't read in a long time called Don't Steal Sheep. It's something like Don't Steal Sheep or something. I think I'm missing half the title. But one of the principles of that book is to not adjust letter spacing for lowercase characters because it makes it a lot harder to read. I think it's a misconception that spacing out characters makes it easier to read, because when you space out characters, it actually makes the characters feel further apart from each other and less like a word. And so I highly recommend against ever adjusting letter spacing unless you're using all caps. That is kind of like the general principle there. In terms of process, to truly create something creative in terms of like a lot of like type combinations, so like combining body text with heading text, I would say is definitely more experimentation focused. There are a lot of different ways people kind of go about trying to explain it more as a rule focused way. And I think those can be hit or miss. The biggest, most popular method that people tend to use is they try to compare the shapes of the characters with each other by overlapping them on top of each other. So if the shapes of the characters are similar, they will often look good together, but then that's only one methodology. Another methodology is to find fonts where the shapes look very different from each other and try to create contrast that way. When you're combining fonts that are in the same general family, like two sans serifs, finding fonts with two different shapes can be a little bit more beneficial because then there's more contrast. So, for example, one mistake I see is like if you randomly use like Source Sans, it's a tongue switch there, Source Sans Pro for your headings, and then you decide to use PT Sans for your body text. These are two different fonts, but they are not a good pairing because they're too similar to each other. So they basically look the same, and so there's not really a point of using both of them. But if you use something that's very different, like pop-ins, for example, those are the first ones that came to mind. But you'll notice that there's higher contrast here, so there's more of a point of using both of the fonts together. Pop-in tends to be a better heading font because it's so round and wide, whereas PT Sans tends to be a better body font because it's a little bit more narrow and you can put more information next to each other. Some additional exercises. I actually have this font game that you can also try if you want to. It's called Font Guesser. It's like that one is specifically for identifying fonts. I had a lot of fun making it, but that one I think is like fun because you can see, you can kind of see the different details within different fonts and kind of learn to appreciate them. Some other exercises are, the most important one I think is to analyze typography that you like, that you think is effective, and try to understand why it works. So if you see a website that you really like, kind of take a deeper look at it and break it down. You can understand like, oh, they use a really big heading, and then they pair it with this and kind of try to figure out why you like it and why it works. I think a lot of it comes down to analysis because there isn't a formula for pairing fonts together. Yes, the Stop Stealing Sheep is the book that I talked about earlier. I haven't read it in a really long time. It's really old, but that was the first one I thought of. Continue to put your questions there. And yes, I will share the link to that. I'm going to not do these two exercises here, but the reason why I used these two prompts is because this first prompt, a lot of times designers recommend or encourage against using italics, but now there's kind of a trend of bringing more italicized elements within your type hierarchy. And so I thought it'd be fun to experiment. Really common one that people experiment with is using a italicized serif. So this like vibe is really trendy right now. And then prompt number 4, using lobster papyrus within your design and trying to make it work. This one I put as a prompt because designers tend to dislike these two fonts specifically. And so I thought it'd be a fun challenge to try to figure out how to incorporate it into your work. And so when I run this exercise in the past, one of the things I have noticed with this one specifically is that something that tends to work is to not necessarily work, but something that's fun to experiment with specifically is the idea of using like multiple fonts within the word to kind of soften the fact that it's all lobster, and then lobster kind of becomes more of a decorative element. When you're using multiple fonts within the same word, the biggest thing to watch out for is the height of the lowercase character and making sure that the elements are like still legible, but kind of like fit the same style. And so that's like one thing you can try. You can also try finding fonts that are very different weights in terms of weight or width and try creating contrast that way as well. But the biggest thing here is like trying to figure out like how big the different fonts should be and like how to space them together. This is extremely chaotic, but hopefully you understand where I'm going with it. It looks like my link for font guesser didn't go through, but it's artofvisualdesign.com/font guesser without the E, inspired by GeoGuessr.
Let me share it on the screen as well.
Oh, thanks. Any last minute questions? I'm going to kind of do a little tour of what people have been working on. So I kind of browse through. Ooh, there's so many creative ones out here. I love seeing what people do with color. I think color is one of the most impactful visual design elements that's out there. Ooh. Like the circles in the background. Awesome. It was really cool to see everything that you all came up with in a very short span of time.
Love to see it. I also took some Instagram stories if y'all want to see as well. Oh wow, there's people chatting on Figma.
You can also chat in Figma. Yeah, if you see anything that you like, go ahead and leave a little note for the person. So cool.
You can also comment on each other's stuff as well.
Yeah. I'll leave this file open. So if you want to pop in later, if you're like streaming from your phone or something, you can feel free and try the exercises on your own as well. And definitely share these online, and you can also tag me. I can take a look too. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This was really, really fun.
Yeah, this is so fun. Really appreciate it. I see questions in the chat being recorded. Yes, all of our events are recorded unless otherwise noticed. You can find this on our LinkedIn Live and YouTube for Design Buddies. Cool. Any closing thoughts, takeaways?
Are you asking me or the chat?
Everyone.
Okay, I was like,
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Really excited to be here. I will follow up on the email about I'll send out everyone an email if you sign up on the Luma link, which I will share in the link. So if you sign up for this event, you'll get all the emails. But if not, we'll post it in our Discord server, which is the discord.gg/designbuddies or designbuddies.community. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for coming on. I really enjoyed the workshop, and I love how you made such an interactive format and how everyone got hands-on. Instead of like showing through slides, you made everyone like, go into Figma file and kind of like work through that, which I really loved. And I really like that format as well. And I love how everyone was so engaged on like LinkedIn and engaging in the Figma file as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And if you also like what you saw here, Elizabeth does have a course called Art of Visual Design, and we are offering 10% off with the code DesignBuddies10. And if you're a student, you can also get 20% off by emailing us, Elizabeth, with proof of roll of enrollment. And yeah, so thanks so much, everyone, and happy holidays. Bye, everyone.
thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you. Okay.